The drone hovered outside Jessica Miller's bedroom window at exactly 7:03 a.m. on a Tuesday. She was still in her pajamas, coffee mug in hand, when she spotted the small black device with its blinking red light floating just beyond her second-story window. It wasn't the first time, and Jessica knew exactly who was behind it. "Margaret Holloway," Jessica muttered, setting her coffee down so hard it sloshed onto the pristine countertop. "That woman doesn't know when to quit." Margaret Holloway, known throughout Sycamore Estates as HOA Karen, had been elected president of the Homeowners Association 6 months ago. Since then, life in the previously peaceful suburban development had transformed into a bureaucratic nightmare for residents who dared to deviate from Margaret's vision of neighborhood perfection. Jessica's crime? Converting part of her backyard into a small vegetable garden. A farm, as Margaret had dramatically labeled it in her weekly HOA newsletter. Throwing on a robe, Jessica marched downstairs and out her back door. The drone retreated slightly but remained hovering above her property. In the early morning light, Jessica could make out the HOA logo emblazoned on its side. Margaret's latest investment using association funds. "I can see you, Margaret," Jessica shouted, knowing the drone was equipped with audio. "This is harassment and completely illegal." From over the fence, Jessica's neighbor Tom poked his head out. "She got you too. That thing was hovering over my new deck extension for 20 minutes yesterday." "The deck extension she denied your permit for?" Jessica asked. "The very same," Tom said with a grimace. "Apparently, it's 6 inches taller than regulation." The drone dipped lower, its camera clearly focusing on Jessica's garden beds where tender shoots of tomatoes, zucchini, and peppers were beginning to emerge. Jessica's phone buzzed with a notification. The Sycamore Estates HOA app, mandatory for all residents, displayed a new message. Violation notice. Unauthorized agricultural activity. Fine $150. Second offense. What infuriated Jessica most wasn't the fine. It was that nowhere in the HOA bylaws did it prohibit vegetable gardens. Margaret had simply decided that Jessica's garden didn't fit the aesthetic vision of Sycamore Estates. Jessica snapped several photos of the drone, then tapped out a quick email to her cousin who worked as a privacy attorney. This had gone too far. Later that afternoon, as Jessica pulled into her driveway after work, she spotted Margaret standing on the sidewalk in front of her house. The HOA president was impeccably dressed in a crisp beige pantsuit, her blonde bob not moving an inch in the breeze. She held a tablet and was methodically photographing Jessica's front yard. "Can I help you, Margaret?" Jessica asked, not bothering to hide the edge in her voice. Margaret's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Just documenting the neighborhood's compliance status. Your mailbox is 2 inches shorter than the approved height." Jessica felt her blood pressure rising. "There's nothing in the bylaws about mailbox height." "There is now," Margaret replied smoothly. "We voted on the amendment last night, special emergency session. Without notifying all homeowners, that's against the rules." Margaret's smile tightened. "We sent an email at 11 p.m. Not our fault if people don't check their messages." As Margaret walked away, Jessica noticed something tucked under her arm. A controller for the drone that was now reappearing over the rooftops. That's when Jessica decided. This meant war. The next morning, Jessica woke before dawn. She'd spent half the night researching drone laws and HOA regulations, fueled by 3 cups of coffee and righteous indignation. By 5:30 a.m., she was in her garden, installing a privacy screen of lattice panels draped with flowering vines, perfectly within the HOA guidelines for decorative garden structures. As she secured the last panel, Jessica noticed a small gathering across the street. 3 neighbors huddled in whispered conversation, occasionally glancing her way. One of them, Linda from 4 houses down, broke away and approached. "Morning, Jessica," Linda said, nervously twisting her wedding ring. "That's quite the project you got going." Jessica smiled. "Just adding some privacy to enjoy my garden in peace." About that, Linda lowered her voice. "Margaret's called an emergency meeting tonight. She's proposing a ban on agricultural activities and a mandatory drone inspection program. Says it's for community security." Jessica's grip tightened on her hammer. She can't be serious. She's gathered enough supporters. Most people are too afraid to cross her. Linda glanced back at her waiting friends. She's been posting compliance ratings for each house on the community board. People with low scores are suddenly finding their guest parking privileges revoked or pool access restricted. "That's completely beyond her authority," Jessica said. Linda shrugged. "Try telling her that. Anyway, meeting's at 7. You might want to be there." After Linda left, Jessica called in sick to work and drove to the county clerk's office. 3 hours and a stack of paperwork later, she had copies of the original HOA incorporation documents, bylaws, and financial records, all public information that Margaret had conveniently failed to make accessible to residents. What Jessica discovered made her blood boil. Margaret had been systematically altering the bylaws without proper notice or voting procedures. Even worse, HOA funds had been diverted to purchase not just one drone, but a fleet of 5, listed in the budget as security equipment. That evening, Jessica arrived at the community center 20 minutes early, folders of documents under her arm. She wasn't surprised to find the parking lot already full. Inside, Margaret stood at the podium, her supporters occupying the front rows. "Well, look who decided to join us," Margaret said, her voice dripping with false pleasantry as Jessica entered. "We were just discussing your unauthorized farming operation." Jessica smiled calmly. "I believe the correct term is vegetable garden, Margaret, and there's nothing in the original bylaws prohibiting them. The amended bylaws clearly state." "About those amendments," Jessica interrupted, placing her folders on the table. "I've been doing some light reading at the county clerk's office. Interesting stuff." Margaret's smile faltered slightly. "We don't have time for this. We need to vote on the new security measures." Jessica opened the first folder. "Before we do that, I'd like to call attention to Article 7, Section 3 of the original bylaws, which states that all amendments require a 2/3 majority vote with 14 days' notice to all homeowners." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Furthermore, Jessica continued, financial expenditures exceeding $5,000 require budget approval at the annual meeting. The drone fleet, yes fleet, there are 5 of them, cost $23,000. The murmur grew louder. Margaret's face flushed red. "That's a complete misrepresentation," Margaret snapped, but Jessica was already passing out copies of the financial records. Tom stood up. "Is this true, Margaret? You spent our dues on spy drones without a proper vote?" Another resident, an elderly man who rarely attended meetings, slowly rose to his feet. "My late wife helped write those original bylaws. They were designed to protect all homeowners, not to harass them." Margaret's knuckles turned white as she gripped the podium. "This meeting is adjourned," she declared, gathering her papers. "Actually," Jessica said, "according to the bylaws, only a majority vote can adjourn a meeting prematurely. Should we take a count?" The room erupted into chaos. Neighbors who had silently endured Margaret's reign suddenly found their voices, shouting questions and demands. Margaret repeatedly banged her gavel, but the tide had turned. "Order! I will have order!" Margaret's voice strained to be heard over the commotion. Jessica stood calmly in the center of the storm she'd unleashed. She caught Tom's eye across the room. He gave her a subtle thumbs up. After several minutes, the elderly man who had spoken up, Mr. Peterson, a retired judge, raised his hands. "If I may suggest," he said in a voice that commanded respect despite its age, "we should follow proper procedure here. Let's vote on whether to continue this meeting and then establish an investigative committee." Margaret looked as if she might object, but the mood of the room made it clear that would be unwise. The vote was nearly unanimous to continue, with only Margaret and her 3 closest allies opposed. "Fine," Margaret said through clenched teeth, "but this doesn't change anything about the violations that have been documented." An hour later, the meeting concluded with 2 significant outcomes. A 3-person committee would audit the HOA finances and review bylaw changes, and all drone surveillance was suspended pending legal review. As people filed out, Jessica felt a tap on her shoulder. It was Barbara Wilson, the quiet woman who kept immaculate rose gardens and had always seemed firmly in Margaret's camp. "That took courage," Barbara said softly. "But be careful. Margaret doesn't forget things like this." Jessica's victory was short-lived. The next morning, she discovered her car covered in bright orange violation stickers, 1 on each window and 3 across the windshield. Each cited a different infraction: improper parking angle, unauthorized vehicle color. Her car was dark blue, apparently now prohibited, expired HOA parking permit, though hers was valid for another 4 months. Peeling them off took nearly 20 minutes and left sticky residue everywhere. When Jessica finally got into her car, she noticed a drone hovering just down the street. That evening, Jessica received an official-looking envelope under her door. Inside was a notice of a special assessment, $1,200 for emergency landscaping rehabilitation of her property. Attached were close-up photos of her vegetable plants, each labeled with supposed violations. The notice was signed not by Margaret, but by the HOA's newly hired compliance officer. Margaret's brother-in-law, Jessica discovered after a quick social media search. "Two can play at this game," Jessica muttered, reaching for her phone. Over the next 3 days, Jessica documented everything. She photographed the drones following her to and from work. She recorded Margaret and her brother-in-law walking onto her property without permission to take measurements of her garden beds. She saved every violation notice, email, and message. On Friday afternoon, Jessica's doorbell rang. She opened it to find a sheriff's deputy holding a clipboard. "Jessica Miller, I have a cease and desist order regarding your agricultural operation and violation of community standards." Jessica took the papers with a steady hand. Let me guess, Margaret Holloway requested this. The deputy looked uncomfortable. I'm just delivering the paperwork, ma'am. After he left, Jessica scanned the document. It was full of legal jargon, but essentially demanded she remove her garden immediately or face legal action from the HOA. Jessica was still reading when her phone rang. It was her cousin, the privacy attorney. Good news, he said without preamble. The drone surveillance is completely illegal without proper notification and consent, and I found 3 precedent cases where HOAs were successfully sued for similar overreach. Perfect timing, Jessica replied. I've just been served. Her cousin chuckled. Even better. Now we can countersue. That night, Jessica noticed something odd. The usual drone was missing from its surveillance post near her home. Instead, when she went to take out the trash, she spotted it hovering over another house belonging to Tom, who had supported her at the meeting. As she watched, the drone dip lower, its camera clearly recording Tom's newly extended deck. Jessica frowned, then pulled out her phone and began recording the drone itself. 2 could indeed play at this game. The weekend brought unexpected rain, keeping the drones grounded and giving Jessica time to formulate a plan. She spent Saturday morning creating a private online group for affected neighbors. By evening, 23 households had joined, nearly a third of Sycamore estates. It's not just the gardens or decks, Linda wrote in the group chat. Margaret fined me $350 for having non-approved window treatments. They're the same curtains I've had for 6 years. She cited me for an unauthorized basketball hoop, another neighbor added. It's been here since we moved in 15 years ago. The stories poured in. Arbitrary fines, selective enforcement, approved renovations, suddenly deemed violations, and personal vendettas dressed up as compliance issues. Every incident had begun after Margaret's election. On Monday, Jessica invited the group members to her house. While some were too nervous to attend in person, 11 neighbors gathered in her living room, documentation in hand. I've spoken with my cousin, Jessica explained. He believes we have grounds for a class action lawsuit against both Margaret personally and the HOA board for abuse of authority and illegal surveillance. A lawsuit could take months, even years, Tom pointed out. Meanwhile, she's making our lives miserable. That's why we're pursuing parallel strategies, Jessica replied. The lawsuit is one approach, but we also need to work within the HOA structure to remove Margaret and revise the bylaws. Barbara, the rose gardener, raised her hand. The bylaws allow for a recall vote with signatures from 40% of homeowners. Exactly, Jessica nodded. We're already at nearly 30% just in this room. As the meeting progressed, a comprehensive strategy took shape. They divided into teams. One group would gather signatures for the recall petition. Another would continue documenting violations of HOA procedures, and a third would prepare for the legal action. Jessica was reviewing their notes when her phone buzzed with a text from Tom. Drone over your backyard right now. She rushed to her window. The rain had stopped, and sure enough, one of the drones hovered directly above her garden. But something was different. This drone was larger than the others, with an attachment dangling beneath it. Jessica hurried outside just as the drone released its payload. A fine mist sprayed across her vegetable plants. Horror struck as she realized what was happening. Herbicide. No, Jessica shouted, running toward her garden beds as the drone ascended and zipped away. She frantically turned on her garden hose, trying to wash off whatever chemical had been sprayed. Some of the younger plants were already wilting before her eyes. Jessica was still desperately watering when Tom rushed into her backyard. I saw what happened, he said breathlessly. I followed the drone. It went straight to Margaret's garage. Jessica's hands shook with rage as she called the police. While waiting, she took soil samples and photographs of the dying plants. Tom set up his phone on a tripod, recording the garden to document the damage progression. The police arrived 30 minutes later. Officer Ramirez listened carefully as Jessica explained what had occurred, then asked, Do you have any proof the drone came from Ms. Holloway's property? I followed it, Tom said firmly, and I recorded its flight path on my phone. As Officer Ramirez reviewed the footage, Jessica's doorbell rang. It was Linda, looking panicked. There's another drone over my yard right now, she gasped, and I think it's carrying the same sprayer. Jessica locked eyes with Officer Ramirez. Would you like to witness this happening in real time? The officer nodded sharply. Lead the way. The scene at Linda's house was chaos. By the time Jessica and Officer Ramirez arrived, the drone had already released its payload over Linda's prized rose bushes. Linda's teenage son was frantically hosing down the plants while Linda herself stood filming with her phone, tears streaming down her face. Those roses were my mother's, she said, voice breaking. Some of those cuttings are 30 years old. The drone hovered just beyond reach as if observing the destruction it had caused. Officer Ramirez grabbed his radio. Dispatch, I need backup at 47 Sycamore Lane. Possible property damage in progress and unauthorized drone operation. Jessica pointed at the drone. That's illegal chemical spraying. It's the same one that just hit my vegetable garden. Officer Ramirez nodded, maintaining a professional demeanor despite the unusual situation. Ma'am, do you have any idea what chemical might have been used? No, but I've taken soil samples from my garden, and you might want these too. Jessica handed him a stack of papers. Documentation of the drone surveillance, HOA meeting minutes where drone usage was suspended pending review, and statements from 17 neighbors who've experienced similar harassment. The officer looked impressed. You've been thorough. The drone suddenly ascended and began to move away. Officer Ramirez instantly took photos of it, capturing close-ups of its identification numbers. That's registered commercial equipment, he noted. Those have to be licensed and logged. We can trace it. Within 20 minutes, 2 more police cars arrived. As officers took statements, Jessica noticed a small crowd gathering. Neighbors who had been silent now watched openly from their driveways and porches. I dispatched officers to speak with Ms. Holloway, Officer Ramirez informed them. In the meantime, we need samples of the affected vegetation and soil. While this was happening, Jessica's phone buzzed with a message from Barbara. Emergency HOA email just went out. Margaret claims environmental contaminants were detected in certain gardens that pose immediate health risks to the community. Says the HOA is conducting emergency remediation. Jessica showed the message to Officer Ramirez, whose expression hardened. That's convenient timing, and potentially evidence of premeditation. As the officers collected evidence, a silver Mercedes turned onto the street, Margaret's car. She parked directly in front of Linda's house and emerged wearing an immaculate pantsuit, her face a mask of concern. What's happening here? Margaret asked, approaching with an air of authority. I received reports of a disturbance. Officer Ramirez stepped forward. Miss Holloway, I'm Officer Ramirez. We're investigating reports of property damage via drone activity. Margaret's smile remained fixed. The HOA has been conducting standard maintenance inspections. If there's been any misunderstanding, spraying chemicals on private property without consent isn't a misunderstanding, Jessica interrupted. It's vandalism, and we have it on video. Margaret's smile faltered slightly. Any actions taken by the HOA are within our legal rights to maintain community standards. The bylaws clearly state. I'd like to see documentation authorizing chemical spraying on private property, Officer Ramirez interjected. I don't have that with me, Margaret replied, her composure slipping. Then perhaps you can explain it at the station, came a new voice. An older officer approached, his badge indicating higher rank. Ms. Holloway, we'd like you to accompany us to answer some questions. As Margaret was escorted to a police car, not in handcuffs, but clearly not voluntarily, she locked eyes with Jessica. This isn't over, she mouthed silently. Jessica watched the police car drive away, and the reality of what had happened finally sinking in. The vegetable garden she lovingly tended was likely destroyed, but something else had sprouted in its place. The neighbor of its collective courage to stand up against tyranny. Margaret was released from police questioning that evening with no formal charges, yet. The officers explained to a disappointed Jessica that they needed to complete their investigation, including analysis of the soil samples and identification of the chemicals used before moving forward with potential criminal charges. These things take time, Officer Ramirez told her gently, but we're taking this seriously. Unauthorized aerial spraying of chemicals could violate multiple state and federal laws. The following morning, Jessica awoke to find her front yard transformed. Someone had placed a dozen potted vegetable plants, tomatoes, peppers, zucchini, on her porch with a simple note, to replace what was lost. Throughout the day, more neighbors arrived with plants, soil, and offers to help rebuild her garden. By noon, nearly 30 people were working in Jessica's yard, removing contaminated soil and replacing it with fresh dirt. Tom had brought lumber to build raised beds, harder to spray, he explained with a grim smile. Linda's teenage son, a technology enthusiast, installed small solar-powered security cameras disguised as garden ornaments. Let's see Margaret explain these videos away, he said proudly. As the impromptu gardening party continued, Jessica received a text from her cousin. Judge granted our emergency injunction. No drone flights over any properties until after the hearing next week. Jessica shared the news, prompting a small cheer from the gathered neighbors. Their celebration was short-lived, however. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled up, and a man in an expensive suit emerged carrying a leather briefcase. Jessica Miller? He called out, approaching the yard. I'm Lawrence Keller, attorney for the Sycamore Estates Homeowners Association. I have some documents for you. Jessica wiped her hands on her jeans and stepped forward to accept the thick envelope. Inside was a formal letter notifying her of an emergency board decision. The HOA was imposing a special assessment on all homeowners for security and environmental remediation, $2,000 per household, due within 30 days. "This is retaliation," Jessica said, looking up at the lawyer. He maintained a neutral expression. The board vote was unanimous. "Impossible," Tom interjected. "The entire board wasn't even present for any vote. I believe you'll find all procedures were followed correctly," the lawyer replied, handing similar envelopes to the other homeowners present. "Good day." As Keller walked back to his SUV, Barbara stepped forward. "Margaret's trying to bankrupt anyone who can't afford the assessment. It's a power play to force compliance, or to make us drop the lawsuit," Jessica added. Mr. Peterson, the retired judge, examined the documentation carefully. "This special assessment requires a 75% vote of all homeowners according to the bylaws. Did any of you vote on this?" The gathered neighbors shook their heads. "Then it's invalid on its face," he concluded. Jessica's phone rang, an unknown number. She answered cautiously. "Jessica Miller? This is Diana Fraser from Channel 12 News. We've received reports about drone surveillance and property damage in Sycamore Estates. Would you be willing to comment?" Jessica locked eyes with Tom, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Actually," Jessica replied, "I think several of us would be willing to comment. And we have documentation." The news van arrived within the hour. As Jessica prepared to give her interview, she noticed something in the sky above a house 3 streets over, the unmistakable shape of a drone hovering despite the court injunction. Jessica smiled grimly at the reporter. "You know what? I think we might be able to show you exactly what we're talking about in real time." The Channel 12 news crew didn't need much convincing to follow Jessica's suggestion. Within minutes, they had repositioned their van and cameras to capture footage of the drone hovering over the neighborhood in clear violation of the court order. "Is that one of the drones you mentioned in your complaint?" Diana Fraser asked, microphone extended toward Jessica as the camera operator zoomed in on the device. "Yes, that's one of the 5 drones purchased with HOA funds without proper authorization," Jessica confirmed. "And it's currently violating a court-ordered injunction against drone flights in our neighborhood." Diana's eyes lit up at this development. "And who controls these drones?" "Margaret Holloway, our HOA president," Jessica replied, making sure to speak clearly. "The same person who had me served with cease and desist orders for growing vegetables in my backyard." The interview continued, with several neighbors sharing their experiences of Margaret's increasingly erratic enforcement of HOA rules. Tom showed the reporter his deck extension and explained how the measurements were within guidelines until Margaret arbitrarily changed them. Linda displayed photographs of her damaged rose bushes, her voice breaking as she described their sentimental value. Throughout the interview, the drone continued its surveillance pattern, moving from house to house, focusing specifically on homes belonging to residents who were speaking to the news crew. "It's almost as if it's targeting people who are talking to you," Diana observed, gesturing toward the drone. Jessica nodded. "That's exactly what's happening. It's intimidation." As if on cue, Officer Ramirez's patrol car turned onto the street. He stepped out, immediately noticing the drone and the news crew. "Ms. Miller," he greeted Jessica professionally, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely surprised to find her at the center of this new development. "I received a call about a possible violation of the temporary injunction." "Perfect timing," Jessica replied, pointing skyward. "It's been up there for at least 20 minutes. The officer spoke into his radio requesting backup. "Do we know who's operating it?" Before Jessica could answer, a shout came from down the street. "It's coming from Margaret's garage again." It was Linda's son, running toward them with his own drone controller in hand. "I've been tracking its signal pattern." The news crews swung their cameras toward the teenager as he explained the technical details of how consumer drones operated on specific frequencies. Each controller has a unique signature. This one matches the drone that sprayed chemicals yesterday. Officer Ramirez nodded grimly. "That's enough for me." He turned to his newly arrived backup. "Let's pay Ms. Holloway another visit." The news crew followed at a respectful distance as the officers approached Margaret's immaculate colonial home. The garage door was closed, but the side door stood slightly ajar. Unusual for someone as security-conscious as Margaret. Officer Ramirez knocked on the front door. No answer. After several attempts, he conferred briefly with his partner before approaching the garage's side entrance. "Ms. Holloway, Police Department, we need to speak with you regarding a violation of a court order." When no response came, the officers cautiously pushed the door open wider, announcing their presence again. The news camera captured the moment perfectly. The open door revealing Margaret seated at a folding table, surrounded by drone controllers, monitors showing various camera feeds of the neighborhood, and a large map of Sycamore Estates with red pins marking specific houses. "Ms. Holloway," Officer Ramirez said firmly, "please step outside." Margaret's head snapped up, her expression changing from concentration to shock as she realized she had an audience, including news cameras capturing every moment of her sophisticated surveillance operation.